Hi, Redesigning Health and Home community. Today, Carrie and I are so thrilled to share with you a wonderful and inspiring guest interview episode. It'll be me, Meg, hosting this conversation, but Carrie's, of course, right there with us, cheering us on behind the scenes. I'll be speaking with Kathleen Paley from the Reframe podcast. And Kathleen was kind enough to share her bio with us, so let me just take a moment to properly introduce her. Kathleen is a longtime DC-based big law litigator who's on the cusp of an exciting new adventure, early retirement. As she transitions from the billable hour to truly owning her own time, she's looking forward to diving deeper into the things she already loves. Producing The Reframe, her podcast all about exploring how we can build lives we truly love. Civic volunteerism, ambitious multi-day baking projects, traveling on points and miles, and of course, spending quality time with her wonderful husband and kids. I know you're going to find Kathleen's story and insights as motivating as I did. So let's lean in and learn more about how she's helping people reframe their lives for the better. Welcome, Kathleen.
Meg, thank you so much for reaching out, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast with Carrie. You guys have a great vibe. You really just, it's clear that you're really friends, and it's wonderful.
Oh, we are, and I appreciate that. And I will tell you, I found your podcast, and I dove right in. And some of my favorite episodes, one, the consumption episode where you talked about using all of your products before buying and doing that little challenge, and the series about how to use points and save money, and your latest episode about going part-time from your lifelong career. So I want to hear it all. Can you start by just sharing a little bit about maybe your pivot from minimalist mom to reframe and then into life, career, and more?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, as you said, I started my podcast, and it was called the Minimalish Mom Podcast. Now, this was basically it was a lazy woman's choice in that I had had the Instagram handle Minimalish Mom for a decade, and I thought, well, I want to start a podcast. I'll just use that name. And over the course of the decade in which I had this Instagram handle, I talked on Instagram a lot about all of the principles that I think are core to the podcast. A lot about minimalism, but not in like an overly prescriptive, overly strict way. A lot about like environmental efforts, sort of living a simple, intentional life. And I thought, okay, I'll just use this name. But as time went on over the course of, say, the first year of podcasting, I thought, well, my sense is that this name is actually going to be a bit of a blocker to folks they're going to think it's only about motherhood or it's only about minimalism. And it really wasn't at its core about either one of those things. It was just the handle I'd had on a social media channel for a long time. But I decided, I was like, okay, I've got to think about, how to explain what this podcast is really about. And I've long said it's about how we can use minimalism and stoicism and financial independence to sort of step away from the expectations, the sort of scripts that we have, the things that we tell ourselves, the sort of consumption treadmill, the hedonic treadmill, step away from that and figure out what really brings us joy in life. Because hopefully life is long, but even if it's very long, life is still short. And we've got to figure out like what is going to be the best life for us, not just something that's performatively the best for sort of cultural expectations. And so I thought what this is really about is reframing the way we look at things. And so I thought, oh, the reframe, it felt like it really was going more towards the essence of what the information I was kind of trying to put out into the world and the kind of little community I was trying to develop, because it's stepping back from the sort of automatic ways we think about things and saying like, let's reframe this a little bit and let's figure out how we can approach things in a way that really brings us like a kind of a deeper joy.
That is fantastic. Now, you mentioned minimalism and stoicism. What is your main focus with those two, or explain it a little bit about how you approach that.
Yeah. So, I think with minimalism, it gets both it's been very trendy over the last 15 years or so, especially in design. But it also gets a bit of a bad rap because people think, I don't want to own 45 items that fit in a backpack. And that's all. I don't want to have 4 plates for a family of 4, and they think of it as very stark and very, very prescriptive and frankly, very like judgy. And that is not my approach at all. I think it's something where one, minimalism is not just about stuff. It's about how we approach everything. Is it our calendars, our sort of approaches to like family life, and it's about our stuff. And so with minimalism, what I found is just on the stuff front, you could say, like start with the stuff. I've never had a problem with getting rid of things. Like I don't donating things, like clearing stuff out of the house. That's actually fun. I mean, some people would say, what sort of a sicko are you that you actually enjoy decluttering? But I find decluttering very fun.
I think that's why I gravitated to some of your episodes. They just were such actionable tips. So I don't want to interrupt, but keep going.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, the getting rid of things was never difficult. And in fact, the moment I had a box in a corner with a few things to get rid of, I was like, let's just do this now. It was never like oh, it's going to sit there forever and I'm going to perseverate over it. I was like, let's act. Let's get this stuff out of the house. But I realized there was in a very busy schedule, I had a really busy career. In a very busy schedule, I was adding just a lot of time on like inflows and outflows, inflows and outflows. I'm like, it actually kind of felt like a burden, even though decluttering was fun. And I was like, you know what? It's sort of one of those duh moments. But it's like, could probably stem the inflows a little bit and this would all be easier. And so it was realizing that in the very busy career, one of my few little outlets was shopping. I mean, and it was
Sure.
not like going to Hermes and irresponsible shopping. It would be, I've, you know, I've been on 4 airplanes this week. I've taken 2 depositions. I've got little kids who are like pulling at my dress all the time and always need something. Every moment of the week has been about what other people need. I'm just going to take the legitimate time to go to Wegmans and Target and because we need groceries. So I'm going to go shopping at Wegmans and Target. But then I would you go into Target and you go into that home goods section of it, and
Sure.
it was another little vase. It was a cute pillow. It was more paper napkins for an upcoming party. And so nothing that was terribly expensive, nothing that was blowing the budget, nothing that was like putting us in sort of bad financial straits, but it was just a lot of stuff. And, it would always eventually would always go to a very good home. I would like part of the buy nothing group in our town. I would make sure that things were taken care of responsibly. They weren't being sent to the dump. But I realized there's a lot of time being spent on acquiring and there's a lot of time being spent on decluttering. And maybe I could just focus a little bit more on like simplifying that whole process. Don't keep bringing in and flowing out. And then I started to learn more about the environmental cost of our shopping habits and it both in terms of clothing because I would often get do a little stop at Nordstrom Rack on the way back from Target and Wegmans, but I started learning about the environmental cost of our clothing and our home goods and like the textile industry, and I thought, oh my goodness, this isn't even just about my time and budget. This is about human rights issues abroad and how people are treated in places like in Bangladesh where they're in India where they're doing this work. And this is about the fact that we are producing items at such a fantastically accelerating clip that our earth can't sustain this. So I was like, you know what? There are many reasons I need to just like pull back on this shopping habit. And I did for all those reasons. And what I found really it brought a sense of peace. One, there was just less stuff management, I feel like you can spend all of adulthood, particularly all of like motherhood, feeling like your job is just moving things from one part of the house to the other. You know, I can spend a whole weekend just moving things from one part of the house to the other. So it simplified and it lightened the feeling at home because there was less stuff management. And it also meant that one tiny little piece of that aggregate demand globally was being taken away. And so I started sharing about this on Instagram, probably a decade ago to be like, hey, not to be preachy, but to be like, hey guys, I actually hadn't realized this. This is fascinating. Here's the information. Do you want to join me in this effort to just be a little more thoughtful? So that's kind of the minimalism part of it on the stuff front. On the schedule front, which I think is another big part of this, we started looking at the way our time was spent. And I'm in a profession where, this is the same as a lot of professions. It No one's gonna set limits on how much time I can be doing work other than me. Like,
Yes.
I'm a lawyer, I'm on the billable hour for very big clients with very big needs. There is an insatiable demand for my time. And so in thinking about the scheduling, I started to get a little bit better about setting boundaries and barriers, and not in a way that was like storming in and saying, I'm not working on weekends, but quietly saying, let's try to step back this sort of outside the standard office hours work and see, is it going to cause a ruckus in the office, or is no one going to notice? And what I found was interesting is that there's probably more ability to set boundaries than many of us think that there is, especially if we're in a field or in a firm where we've built up a lot of capital with people, like a lot of respect, and they know you're going to get your work done. You're not someone who's blowing deadlines, but you're going to do it in a way that fits within like the jigsaw puzzle of what your family needs. So I started setting more boundaries at work. And we also started looking at our more family schedule and thinking what brings value and what doesn't. Because I think minimalism is all about focusing on what really brings value in life and then ruthlessly cutting out the rest. And this applies on the financial independence side of things too. I think like these are general principles in life. And so we started paring things back from the schedule that didn't really bring value. Part of that was, are there kid activities where the kids are doing them, but just in kind of a like trudging through it? They're not enjoying it. And we feel a little resentful every time we have to take them to this thing. No one's getting value from this. I had both of my boys do piano lessons for a while, and I could tell they were not really enjoying it. It was just a very dutiful thing. And they, oh, it was always a hassle on Monday afternoons at 4:30 to be like, who's going to be working from home so you can take the kids to the piano lessons that they don't want to go to and that are very expensive. Uh, and we thought, you know what? There's no reason to force them to do these piano lessons. This is one, we don't want our kids to live in such a way that they feel like their entire childhood is geared towards what's going to get them into the best college. I was very, very hard on myself as a younger person, and everything. My parents were they said, hey, Kathleen, just like maybe, maybe don't be so hard on yourself. But I was very hard on myself and very focused on academic excellence and very focused on like getting into like an Ivy League school and things like that. And I want them to lead a life that has maybe a little less obsessive focus on that. Like high expectations. They're both 2 years ahead in math. They're on the honor roll. They're doing great, but I don't want them to feel like their entire childhood is focused on what will make you the best adult, like what's going to get you into the best college. So I thought they are not like nascent Beethovens. They are not getting value from these piano lessons. We get irritated by the piano lessons. We felt like the teacher actually like, if we're going to keep paying her, she actually should have been pushing them a little bit more. And so I like, what? Why are we doing this? Like, why are we just like checking this box? Because like we should, people, it's the story that we tell ourselves of people like us. have your child has to do a music, and they have to do a sport, and they have to do some sort of extracurricular academic activity. And like, who gets to write that script? How about we write our own script
Yeah.
for, these are happy, well-adjusted kids. They are super into basketball. They're both very talented in basketball. They're doing really well academically. Why are we forcing this? And so we took away the piano lessons, and you know what? Everyone's happier for it. Everyone.
That's so great. Now, I want to pause you just for 1 second. So, everything that you've said about, the purchases, cutting back, and then your time cutting back, did that all happen at the same time? Or was this an ebb and flow where you first said, oh, this feels good about the donating and maybe not getting so much stuff?
Mhm.
And then did you say, gosh, I see this result. Maybe let's start looking at our time. Or was it all one felt swoop?
It was that's a good question, and it was all a little bit intermingled, but I think the stuff actually did start to come first,
Okay.
because I think when you have a visual representation of things, it's just in your face more. And so the stuff was kind of the starting point of it. And it fed into the time issues because as you have less stuff management, you get a little more time and you realize like, ooh, this is tasty. I like this. I like
Okay.
this like little bit more freedom. And that fed into well, let's kind of we audited our stuff. Let's kind of audit our schedules. And so I think it was a progression, but not like wasn't clear, distinct chunks of time, but one naturally fed into the other.
Now, I'm going to take you way back because I
Mhm.
listened to your interview with Laura Vanderkam on Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned this comes back to your reevaluating your time because you talked about watching TV for an hour a night or something
Mhm.
like that. But then you said, you know what? Maybe I could use this time to get active with my community and active with, our town council. Is
Yeah.
that all when this was happening too? You're reevaluating your time and your how you consume anything.
Yes, yes, and that this was we were evaluating the piano lessons, but we were
Okay.
also looking at our family time more broadly. And my husband and I, we've always thought of ourselves as like fairly disciplined people, and we never binge watch shows. We would not sit on the couch for 4 hours a night, watching TV. But every night we watched as a 1 hour episode of something, and we would sequentially make our way through series, and it was just like a nice little way after the kids were asleep to reconnect. But we realized it was that actually it's lovely, but I was like, this is like 5 hours a week. That's real time. Do we do we get 5 hours a week of benefit out of it, or would it be okay if we did this like twice a week and then you get the other hours back? And what was funny is that in the evening, that 1 hour of television, somehow it took up the entire evening. I don't know how, but, like, you kind
Yeah.
of putz around the house, you put the kids to bed, watch a show, you get ready for bed slowly, you scroll on your phone for a little bit, and then so 1 hour of television seemed to take up the entire evening, and my husband is a very creative person. There's so much in the world that he wants to do, and he felt like he was working a full-time job, very busy too, and I think he was the one who suggested, well, maybe we're thinking about all this, how we use our time. Maybe we just cut back the TV a little bit and watch something together 2 nights a week. It'll make it feel more special because it's less frequent, but it's not so infrequent that you don't have something to look forward to regularly. So I was like, okay, like Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think it was. And that meant Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Suddenly we didn't just have like an hour of time in the evening back. S- We actually got like what felt like many hours in the evening back.
Okay.
Um, so he started working on more woodworking and stained glass projects and stuff. He'd go down to the basement, merge with a table. Not in the course of one evening, but and I started spending the time doing more kind of a lot of journaling, a lot of introspection, and then thinking about how do I want to pivot and start to use time more effectively in a way that's a little more joy giving. And that did end up with I wanted to have more community involvement. And so that community involvement first took the flavor of getting onto just a little city commission that was, I don't know, it was basically dead. People would show up for the meetings, nothing got done. I spent like a year and a half getting nothing done. I thought, okay, maybe this isn't working. But I had continuously connected with people from our city and social media and things like that. And they had seen what I was posting about uh, like city development, and I have strong opinions on like urban design issues, and on environmental stuff. And the head of our city's economic development authority actually reached out to me and he said, I think you would be a really it would be really great to get you involved in the economic development authority. And so my thought was, cool, I'll just do like, what you have an activity, I can show up and help for a few hours. This sounds more interesting than the moribund commission I've been sitting on for a year and a half. And he's like, yeah, so we'll present you to the mayor and the city council for, as a commissioner. And I was like, what are you talking about? That felt very important. I mean, this is a small town, admittedly, like we're a
Well,
small city.
official. Yeah.
But yeah, but so since 2019, 2020, I've been like an appointed official in our city as a commissioner on the Economic Development Authority. And that started, they have evening meetings. And then when you're working on a project for them, it's often like, here are a bunch of applications. We need you to evaluate them and score them and rank them and like provide feedback. So that would take up, one of those evening slots. And suddenly, rather than just kind of watching an hour of TV and scrolling on social media for a while, I was actually doing something that felt like it was contributing and like substantively making your city a better place. And I was like, okay, this is like high value use of time, and
High
not in a
value.
way that's like overly optimized where you're like, uh, someone who's like lives their life in an app that's always optimizing your time, but just in like this is really contributing. I felt like there was more purpose and more value coming out of those hours.
That's a beautiful story and really intentional for your reframe of life. We here at Redesigning Health and Home, we're always wanting to redesign every
Mhm.
aspect of health and home. And then I want to talk a little bit about something you've recently reframed is your career. You've
Yeah.
right? Your empowering story about your negotiating your time as well. I want to pause because I want
Okay.
you to share about that. What has happened since August for you of the 2025?
It's been a big shift. So, I think I need a little bit of backstory, if I can give a little
Of
bit of backstory.
course, we want to hear
Okay.
it.
So so as part of this, like, bigger life redesign over the last decade or so, my husband and I have become very interested in financial independence with the aim of retiring early. People hear about the FIRE,
Yes.
community, that's it. And again, like minimalism, it's one of those things that has a lot of adherence, but it also gets a lot of like negative press because you hear about people who are like, I'm going to not I'm going to have 40 things in my backpack that I, live in, but maybe that too. But like I'm going to live on nothing but rice and beans and, $5 a day for the rest of my life because I don't want to work. That was not our attitude. We enjoy being busy. We enjoy being like busy in a productive, positive, like exciting way. We enjoy just having projects and creating things. And we've actually enjoyed our careers, but we also knew we did not want to do office jobs for a standard, 30 to 40-year career. We did well in them. We had great relationships with our colleagues, but it wasn't joy giving the way some people really get a real like kick out of doing their work. They found the thing that gets them excited. We both found things that and we tell our kids this, you got to find something that you're good at and that will pay you well if you want to like set yourself up well financially. But just you're good at it and it'll pay you well. It doesn't mean you have to love it. It doesn't mean it has to be your identity. You can just do it because it's within your skill set and it's well compensated, and then you can have like a big life outside of that. But we knew that we didn't want to do 40-year office careers, and we knew that we lived pretty simply and lived very much below our means. And so I remember I was in the obstetrician's office because I was pregnant with my youngest, and put out on Facebook. At this point, I don't even think they had an app. We had smartphones, but there wasn't even an app. Just a call to like my colleagues, like bored at the OBGYNs, reading recommendations. I love self-improvement stuff. And one woman I worked with said, you got to tune into this guy, Mr. Money Mustache. And I was like, that's the most ridiculous name I have ever heard. But I started reading, and this is this guy, Pete Adney, who's an early fire guy. Long story short, we both thought, wait a second, we live below our means. We're saving a lot of money. We're paying off our debt, and we don't want to do this forever. Did you know? Did you know that these numbers can actually work so that you can retire early? And we started doing all this modeling, and um, we weren't trying to rush out of our jobs by the time we were 35, but we knew, I thought, oh, 55 is, we're going to make it at 55. Then the numbers started looking better. And I was like, oh, maybe it'll be 50. And the numbers started, you rise in your career. I was taking every bonus and just banking it. Like that goes into the brokerage. You get these big lawyer bonuses. It is not going to private school tuition. It is not going to a second home. It is just going in the brokerage. So long story short, we're now 45 and have reached financial independence, which is like, you want to talk about a stress reducer? My goodness, that's a stress reducer. But since August, I have gone from being a very, very full-time lawyer, because in a big firm, particularly as a litigator who goes to trial, it's there's no ceiling on your hours. There's only a floor. And I was always going well beyond that floor. I was, I've gone from being a very full-time lawyer to being a part-time lawyer on the road towards early retirement. And it has been absolutely, I mean, it's scary. I will admit it's scary. It's a total life shift, but it's also absolutely wonderful. And so I've sort of reframed the way that we look at our money and what it can do for us. And we are so much less interested in using the money to get things and so much more interested in using the money to reclaim our time. And I've thought about it as for nearly 20 years, I've sold my time, and now I can buy back my time, and my time is my own.
That's beautiful. I like that so much. And you have talked on your podcast, The Reframe, how to reframe your ideas on spending. You
Mhm.
talked about, do you really need that third car? Do you really need to buy that bigger home? So you give all of these tips through all of your episodes that are so actionable, relatable. You talked about using your points for your credit cards. I remember you
Mhm.
had that whole series, and that's what I dove in. I'm like, this woman is a genius. She's got all of these great tips. I just ate it up, and I know our audience will too. So I really hope everybody tunes in. When you were talking about going part-time, this part of your story was interesting, that you and your husband had the exact same date you wanted to do this. Can you share that
Yeah.
story? Because it was really an empowerment story for yourself too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, oh my gosh, looking back at early 2025, it was an emotional roller coaster, man,
I
let me tell you.
bet.
So we had, step back to 2024, we had done the math and we figured that by early 2025, we could probably both retire. And I have a friend, Maggie, who has a podcast, Inside Out Money. She and her husband, Greg, they're about our age, and they retired early together, and they did it on the same day. And I remember thinking, like, man, that is so cool. It's like, you are both reclaiming your freedom on the same day. Like, how awesome would that be? So my husband and I have planned to retire on the same day. Now, we're very practical people and wanted to look at how to maximize our bonuses and access to health insurance. And so we had said, okay, we're going to do this. And I will say, little step back. In 2024, we were talking about this, but the real kicker, the final, like, it's not nail in the coffin because that's a negative thing, but the final thing that made this very real was I had 2 trials in 2024. Now, trials in the big law firm, one, it's often not where you live. I'm in DC, and these trials were in St. Louis. And trials are all consuming. You go and you get sucked into the trial vortex for much longer than the length of the trial. You get there ahead of time, you're working on the opening, you've got this room full of a dozen lawyers and a bunch of support folks, and you're just like heads down. I mean, trial days that are 20 hours long are not unusual. You're going maybe on the weekend, you work 14 hours rather than 20 hours, but it's all consuming. It's exhausting. Frankly, we shouldn't do this because the human body can't function optimally when you're doing this. But I had 2 trials and they were both about a month long. I was in St. Louis in the spring and we saw the leaves come onto the trees. And I barely walked outside the entire month. From my workstation, I could see the leaves growing. And I was like, okay, we're here long enough for the leaves to come onto the trees. What do you know? We end up with another trial there. And I had to cancel our kids' spring break to Greece because of the trial. So I was like, I was pretty salty. But I was like, okay, this is just the job. It's just the job, and it's not going to be forever. Well, it turns out we get set for another trial in St. Louis. Same type of matter, same client, and just like the second trial in the fall of 25. And I thought, oh my gosh, can I do this again? And it was funny. I walked back into the same workspace in October and everything was set up identically. It's like we never left. We're doing this again, and it feels like we never left. And in fact, a maintenance guy from the hotel walked in. He's like, "Weren't you guys here in the spring? Did you ever leave?" I was like, "It feels like we didn't."
Groundhog Day part 2.
Exactly, yeah. And so I had another trial in the fall of 2024. It was such a bookend thing. We saw the leaves fall off the trees. I'm like, these same leaves I saw come out, I saw them birthed, and I saw them die. And this is 2025. It's 2 trials. I mean, I had like 100 nights in my Marriott app because in
Sure.
between the trials, you're going and taking the depositions for the next case. And it was just the pace was insane. And that was where we looked at the numbers and we said, we don't want to do this. I missed one of my son's entire school basketball team seasons. It was a short season. I missed the entire season because of one of these trials. And we said, we know that we're headed towards early retirement. We don't want to keep doing this. I can't live this life anymore. I cannot keep missing things from my family. I cannot keep working these hours, which are horrendous for your health, just god awful for your health, physical and mental. And we said, you know what? You can keep telling yourself just one more for a very long time, or you can say the numbers are solid. It's time to just make it official. It's time to pull the plug. And so the end of 2024, we were spending a lot of time figuring out how do we approach our teams at work and tell them that we're
Sure.
leaving. And we had planned early January to approach our folks at work and tell them April 1 is our last day. And that was so that I could get my bonus paid out on April 1, because you worked a lot. You want to get that bonus. And because we wanted to get health insurance through my husband's employer for all of April. So don't quit March 30th, quit April 1, you get it for April. And we were going to go to Japan for spring break, and that was going to be our victory lap. April 1, we retire. April 8th, we go to Japan, and it's just like, life is grand and perfect. We did it. So my husband has the conversation, and they're very disappointed that he's leaving, but
Of
it's
course.
a big corporation. He said, I will help find my successor. He already had people in mind. They had really good succession planning. And so they understood. And there were some other folks at his firm who over time had done this early retirement thing. So the idea was not foreign to the leadership. Not common, but not foreign. I approached my employer. Law firms, you don't really have a boss. There are, people who lead your practice groups. So I approached one of the practice group leaders, and rather than it being like, okay, this is very disappointing, let's put the pieces in place, it was pause, like long pause. You can see the wheels turning, like the
Yeah.
gears are shifting. They're like, what can we do to keep you around? We understand it won't be forever. Although the way we talked about it, I think at first they thought I just needed a break. I just needed to
Okay.
step down, like step back a little bit to like regain energy and footing and then come back.
How did that make you feel, I want to ask? Were you
Yeah.
expecting them to come back with a little negotiation, or were you saying, wow? What were your feelings during that time?
Yeah, I was shocked. I think that we as women have a tendency maybe to undersell ourselves or to underappreciate our value. And I've always been a very self-critical person, and I thought like they'll be disappointed because it's a hassle to fill a spot, but I didn't think that there would be such a response of like, you are an incredibly valuable, integral member of this senior team, and we need you. It was a what can we do? This does not it was very open ended. This think creatively. This does not have to be within the realm of like normal things. Like tell us what you need and we'll see if we can do it. And I was shocked because I thought I'm a cog in the machine, like a highly compensated cog with a very, strong skill set, but just a cog. And I didn't think that they would, I've worked here for almost 20 years. I know these people. They're wonderful people, but I just, as a very self-critical person, I did not think that I had that much value. And then
Mm.
they say you do. And I was like, there were definitely tears. I was crying. I did not think that I had that role. I just thought, "Oh, yeah, they'll find the next one." And so it was really heartening in that way to know you're valued here for your insights, for your skills, for your personality. I've been told, you bring calmness to chaotic situations. That's very helpful. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm glad. And so I did not expect it. So yes, it was shocking in a really positive way of what was the Sally Fields line? They like me. They really like me. At the same time, when you have had in your mind an exit date, and I literally had printed out a calendar and written the numbers of days, like a little mini calendar, four sheets to a page, and then I like cut it up and stapled it so I could like keep it in my work bag and it would be inconspicuous. And I was like crossing off the
Oh,
dates from the fall of 24. I knew exactly how many working days I had until April 1. And when that's been your mindset and you've seen those days like go down and down and
yeah.
down, and then all of a sudden you're resetting and you have a lot more to do than you'd expected. It was a challenging shift because
Okay.
it's when you feel mentally ready to leave something and then it gets stretched out, it can be really hard to recalibrate the way you think about it. I've explained it to some people as sort of senioritis. When you're wistful about like the thing that you're leaving, high school or college, there's been so much good stuff, but you're also so ready and hungry for the next stage that it's really hard to focus on the stage that you're currently in. So I had to reset my thinking about how long I was going to be doing lawyer work. But it was it was surprising to me, and I'm still employed. The sort of big picture was we went through a negotiation process where I was like, "Oh, they really like me, okay." And I thought, "But I don't think I can continue doing this, like, my tank is empty." So I proposed something that I thought was going to be a hard pass, kind of a chuckle, like, "Good one, Kathleen," you know? You're telling us now how much you really do, wanna step away because we're not gonna do this." And instead it was, "Okay." I was like, "Wait, did I have this negotiating power all along and I just didn't realize it?" Like,
Yeah.
you're saying okay to some, I will say, significant contract terms. Things that I never would have thought would be on the plate. Like, it was wishful thinking. I went very aggressive, and I think what it was just fascinating to find out that that was within the scope of what was realistic. I had
Mhm.
undersold myself and my value, for a long time. Now, I'm not saying I was underpaid. I was, ve- I was very well compensated. So, like, not saying that someone had like lowballed me, but I think when you've been part of something for a very long time, when you really are integral to the functioning of an organization, but you don't recognize it, you can lowball yourself. And so it was fascinating and it was heartening to be like, okay, I'm really valued here. And that was wonderful. At the same time, it's like, all right, now I'm gonna keep on working. What we ended up with was rather than April 1, I would work full time through the end of July, um, and then go part time starting in August with an exit in the end of December. And so as of August, rather than 5 or more days per week of doing this in a very, very full time way, um, I've been working an insanely low, beautifully low 2 days a week. Now, at first, it was more like 3 or 3.5 days because there were just things that needed to get done. No one else could do them given the
Sure.
schedules, and I did not want to. I respect and really like the people I work with, and I did not want to leave them hanging high and dry. That would just be don't don't be a jerk, is the basic, approach to things. But I've been able to transition it to being a true 2 days a week and, getting those first tastes of what is it like to own your time? It's been incredible. It's
Oh.
it's transformative, truly.
That's so great. Now, your story there kind of plays into the reframe redesign because you had a plan about you and your husband retiring on that day.
Yeah.
And I can see when plans change, they either are wonderful or they don't. With this plan change, are you saying, gosh, this was really maybe the plan all along? Like it worked out better? Because you said in your episode that if you and your husband had that hard stop together, that
Yeah.
maybe, now he had some time to be on his own and you could slowly integrate into that life. Do you now look at this is the way it was supposed to be all along, or what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I have reflected on this a lot and have come to that conclusion that the way it worked out was actually better than my initial plan. And I know, there's what they call the rosy retrospection bias. We try to, look at our pasts and rewrite it in a way or reframe it in a way that like makes things feel okay. And so we have that natural cognitive bias as humans. But I've tried to look at this somewhat more objectively in the podcast episode you're talking about that came out like a week or two ago does this. It breaks down how did was this actually a better plan than I had sort of worked out to begin with. And I do think it turned out to be better because one, as someone who I was used to having two full-time professional or executive incomes coming in, and you're very accustomed to that. I did not have to think about money because we spent so much less than we made. And then when you're transitioning to nobody's working, you're going to have to, you want to set it up so you're not pinching pennies, but like you do have to actually think about money. So I think as someone who has been very conservative on this whole approach. I think it was actually a good mental step down to go from two incomes to one income and then to one part time income. It allowed the comfort, in a way, it's like the frog in the pot and the water keeps getting warmer, but in a positive way. It
Yes.
allowed me to gain comfort with a different approach to how money comes in. And from a time perspective, yeah, I mean, I'm someone who will I will go to my husband and just sort of talk at him like, "Isn't this wonderful? And aren't we having a great time?" And like just sort of spew thoughts. And he's a wonderful man. And there are many times where we're just like hyping each other up on this, but he also needs a lot of time alone. And he was just coming off a very busy career and he just needed to have like breathing room. And I think
Sure.
if I had been up in his face talking about how amazing this was, he wouldn't have had his breathing room. But instead, from April until now, he has all the flexibility in the world within the bounds of like we have children and
Oh,
so we
sure.
have to get them places and he does all the cooking. But he's done more artistic projects. He has started running with a neighbor who's a friend. He's joined a maker space. And I think it's wonderful for him to be able to get his bearing, get his footing without me just being like constantly up in his face. Now, that said, he's like, you got to get this job done. We're all sick of you having a job. Let's just get this over with because
Oh,
having mom around more at home has turns out it's actually a very good thing and everyone likes it.
nice.
So, yeah, it's one of those things where we can get so set in what we think is the right approach and become like tunnel vision on it and then get really disappointed when it doesn't work. But sometimes there's actually a better plan. And if we get thrown off the path that we thought we were on, it's not necessarily a failure. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's for the better. And, I'm a Christian and I've thought, I don't know, God, did you have a bigger plan for me? And I just needed to listen. Or maybe it was just all happenstance. I have no idea. But I think it did work out.
No,
It actually did work out better than anticipated. Like
that's
better
a
than the plan I had written is the plan as it was executed.
yes, that's a fantastic story. Now, there's one other thing I want to ask about. You have talked so much about how physically and emotionally your career has, it's hard on your body and your mental state, but you
Yeah.
have found ways to add movement into your day. And, when they're providing dinners or buffets, you're going for those veggies. So how have
Yeah.
you incorporated ways to if you're in St. Louis in a dark room for 20 hours a day,
Yeah.
how are you getting your steps? You've shared a little bit about that. Can you share about how we can find ways to still find the benefit of movement and health, even when you're in the dredges of a
Yeah.
heavy career?
When you're in front of a screen all day and just sitting all day. I mean, I found myself, this is a decade ago, but in my mid 30s, and my body just hurt. And I'm like, this is not okay. We are not supposed to just ache at this age and like my hip flexors were so tight and you do your stretches and stuff but there's only so much that a few minutes of stretching can do. So I thought this has to be reimagined. I have to get movement. So I have looked for over time what are the ways to get movement into the day? What are the ways to get better health options into the day? And part of it is not giving a blank about what other people think. Okay, so you gotta give up on like, is someone going to judge me as being a weirdo? So in my office, there are a lot of people when we moved into this new building who one of the options when you're selecting your office was to get a treadmill desk. Like a treadmill that we all have standing desks, but you could get a
Yes.
treadmill that went under it. Spend $1,000 taking out your paycheck, and you show up at your office and there's a treadmill. I did not do that at first, but after a while, I was like, you know what? Those treadmills seem pretty awesome. Now, no one was using them. Everyone had dusty treadmills next to them as they were sitting. And I thought, I'm going to get a treadmill and I'm going to just make it so it's the default. Like, I don't have a way to sit down while working. And so this is one of those you can't care what people think. I set up my treadmill in front of the double monitors, moved the chair to the other side of the room, and made it so if I wanted to sit down and work, I had to take my laptop off of the big monitors, work on the tiny little laptop monitor where you're hunching over and it's uncomfortable and the keyboard's too small. And I thought, I'm going to make it so the default is movement. And we have big windows in our offices, and I have a kind of a fishbowl office, and everyone coming out of the cafeteria can see this weirdo walking on her treadmill all day while typing, while taking calls. Sometimes I stop it while taking calls, so I'm not making people dizzy with the bouncing. But what I found was, wait a second, my body doesn't hurt anymore. This actually feels good. It actually helped minimize that sort of afternoon slump, that post lunch slump when you're just exhausted. Because when you're moving a little bit, your metabolism is operating a little differently. It was easier to stay awake. So people will comment, oh, there's Kathleen on a treadmill. You use that thing all the time. And do you ever stop? And I always know I'm on the 10th floor because I can see Kathleen on her treadmill. And you know what? You could feel uncomfortable with comments like that. But I was like, I don't care because it feels good. And then, yeah, you go to the office partner lunches and there's this big, beautiful buffet and everyone's taking like tiny little portions of things. I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to fill that massive plate with roasted Brussels sprouts and roasted broccoli, a little bit of pasta on the side. Like, this is good for my gut microbiome. And I've been walking all day and eating like a pig in front of everyone else is like being very demure. Walking on the treadmill while, everyone else is seated. In the war room at the trials, I asked our paralegals to get a standing desk. I couldn't get a treadmill, but I could get a standing desk. And so I was the one person among a dozen who was that weirdo who, it turns out, like 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day, is standing at the standing desk. But I will say, um, health-wise and sort of how people were feeling-wise at the trial, I think I ended up coming out the best. And part of it was in the morning before, I'd cut out another hour of sleep, probably not a good idea, but I'd go to the gym and like walk on the treadmill in the gym and then come into the war room and stand. And it was hard. And there were some comments about kind of, yeah, you're a bit of a weirdo. I was like, I don't care because it feels so much better. It's like it resets your body and your mind into so much healthier of a space. So I think a lot of this is be creative in how you think about things, and you do you, and just put aside any sort of snide side commentary that someone might offer. Who gives a flying blank? And just say, I'm going to do what's best for health, physical and mental health.
That's fantastic. And I bet you're probably a pioneer or trailblazer for others to go ahead and take your lead to do that. So hopefully we'll see more of that. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, it's all about the health and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
And I loved that you said, I am blocking out the noise to not listen to what others have to say. That's a fantastic, beautiful way to maybe end our conversation. But Kathleen, I want to hear, where can our listeners find you, follow you, hear more about your story?
Yeah, I would love to connect with any of your listeners who are interested in these types of things. If you want to hear more about my sort of story and the ideas I'm putting out into the world, I have a podcast called the Reframe Podcast. And so just go into Google or Spotify and type in the Reframe. It should come up on top. There are a few older, smaller podcasts that people seem to have abandoned that have the same name, but it should pop up on top as a sort of blue and orange logo, very simple. So the Reframe Podcast, I have about 80 episodes out. They come out every Monday morning at 6 a.m. Talk about all these concepts that you and I have talked about today, Meg. And then on Instagram, I gave up. It hurt my heart, but I gave up that Minimalist Mom handle, and it's now Kathleen at the Reframe Podcast. So I would love to connect with folks.
We will definitely share that in our show notes and on our socials. But Kathleen, this has been so wonderful to speak with you today. Thank you for your time and all of your wonderful information. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Meg, you have been a delight. Thank you so much, and I hope you can enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I'm sure we'll be DMing each other soon.
I hope so. I look forward to it. We'll talk soon. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Redesigning Health and Home podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to like, share, and follow along so you can catch us on all future episodes. You can find me, Meg, at Fit fed, feeling good on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And you can find me, Carrie, on my website at homestylewithcarrie.com and on Instagram and Facebook at homestylewithcarrie. That's Kerri. And you can find both of us at Redesigning Health and Home on Instagram and Facebook. So join us next time for more inspiration on creating a home and a lifestyle that truly supports your best self.